必要が。生殖という行為をして初めて母乳は母体から湧き出すものでしょ。さあ、私に種付けしてください。
さてはこいつ天然だな。
After being bullied for 5 years, he resorted to jerking to anime girls online in his musty room until one fateful day. Mid-jerk, he gets encased in a strange light where he is summoned into the clouds. He finds a hot goddess before him, explaining that he will be reincarnated into a new world, one where he isn't such a loser, but instead has cheat powers to take over the world. Episode 1. Upon first spawning into this new world, he hopes he will get cheat powers in order to live another lazy life. To his surprise, however, he wakes as a baby, making him wonder if he will get a piece of his mom. Not only is he born as a boy, but he has some strange mark on his chest, making him the Emperor's son. They then go to check his magical powers, but to their surprise, it's only 2. With him being such a low rank and no real skills other than barrier skills, the king decides to throw out such a worthless kid. Some of the attendants try to stop the king, but with how useless he is, they throw him out without hesitation. Meanwhile, the goddess wonders why they are doing this. Informing her friend, she gave him too high of powers. Apparently, they can only measure up to 999, so when our protagonist has the level of 1002, he was mistakenly shown as a level 2. With him being so worthless, he was thrown out into a forest, but he decided not to give up here. He tried imagining a barrier with knowledge that he had barrier skills. Soon after, a square appears before him, which is able to be fully controlled by him. He then wonders if he can use it on himself, to which he can, making him a floating baby. With this skill, he thinks everything will go good, but soon after a monster emerges. It bites at him, but does absolutely nothing, only hurting its teeth. He then sends some of the barriers back at him in defense, but it doesn't work. This forces him to try another method, throwing trees at the monster before him. With not even this working, he picks up a large mass of land and throws it at the monster, forcing them to recognize his powers. Now that they are on friendly terms, the monster explains that she was just trying to regain her powers. She asks him who he is, but because he is a baby, he is unable to do anything. He then realizes he can put a barrier on his throat which allows him to speak. He introduces himself as Heart, a baby who was thrown out because his magic was too low. Once he says this, the monster tells him his magic is too high for any human, so he must be lying. She asks if he is the Demon King in disguise, to which he informs her he is, even though he isn't. After he says this, she offers up her body to him, begging to be killed by him. Heart refuses and tells her to just go do something else, telling the monster Flay he has other plans. Before he leaves, Flay pledges her allegiance to him, claiming to offer up herself to him. Apparently, she thought that him calling her Flay was him forming a contract with him. Because of this, he ends up falling to the ground, begging for breast milk to regain his energy. Once he says this, Flay transforms herself into a human form with a rack capable of feeding Heart. Before we continue, let's take a moment to answer the question of the day. If you reincarnated into a new world, what age would you want to start at? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out in the next video. Now, back to the recap. Despite being a baby, he gets embarrassed around her, so he decides to use his skills to give her clothes. Upon doing this, she takes it right off, telling him she has no need for it if she is going to feed him. Once he is done feeding on her, he gets back in his carriage, but is stopped when he overhears someone approaching. They decide to talk it out with the group before attacking, knowing if they fight first, there will be no gain. As the man approaches, he tells Flay that he has come to pick the baby up, but she refuses. She claims that he is her master, so she can't just take him away. The man explains that he knows who the baby is, and he plans on helping him out. He pulls out some breast milk and tells her to give it to the baby already, asking why she is in his way. She demands a reason for why he is helping this baby, to which he begins explaining himself. He tells her that his wife's baby died early, and he heard of someone he knows throwing theirs out, so he wanted to help them out. This moves Flay, so she is brought to tears, allowing the man to recognize her empathy. He offers her a job as his servant, claiming he will pay her fairly. Once she accepts his request, he destroys the carriage and makes it seem like the baby was killed. 9 years after these events, Heart has grown up a bit, being taken under by the man Gold, a Margrave. Heart had originally planned on leaving the land after being able to walk, but he has grown rather fond. The only issue he has in this house is his little sister treats him with ill intentions, never speaking or acknowledging him. She invites Flay various times to play and hang out, but she continues to refuse. This forces Hart to order her to play with his sister, knowing she would be lonely otherwise. He is then approached by his mom telling him that his sister, Charl, needs more interactions. This makes Hart wonder why she doesn't like him, eventually thinking that she knows he is a 30-year-old virgin living in their house. His mom then proposes that he go outside and play with her, telling him he needs to take the first step. He ignores his mom and heads back to his room to lay around, wondering if he should leave this house already. He considers it, but with his body double still incomplete, he knows it's not yet time. Although it looks just like him, it is still unable to move and talk, causing him to spend every day training it. As he thinks of how to improve it, his father emerges, informing him he needs to learn the sword. He tells him that because he is so low level, he needs to learn something, knowing magic isn't his strong suit. Hart then explains that he wants to study ancient magic, hoping it will get him out of sword training. Sadly, this doesn't work, so he is forced to fight his father, a man nicknamed the Rumbling Earth's Warhammer, because of his feats in battle. With this in mind, Hart knows he stands no chance, so he takes it easy on his dad, but ends up showing off a large amount of power. Upon seeing this, his dad tells him to try and dodge this, swinging at his head. Within an instant, Hart dodges the attack, making him wonder how this is possible. He explains that you could only be level 30 to dodge that attack, saying it shouldn't be possible for anyone lower level, let alone a child. This makes Hart wonder what his deal is, having gotten his magic level reassessed multiple times. His father thinks that he must be hiding something, but he has his own secrets, so he decides to just continue with training. Later that night, after they finish training, he tells his wife about what happened today. He shares with her that he might be a demi-demon, explaining that his powers are unexplainable, and he has Flay as his servant. The only thing making them sure of his humanity is the mark on his chest, proving he is the son of the Emperor. Although they are unsure of his true self, they both decide to continue raising him as their own, hoping to deal with him when needed. Episode 2. Later that week, while lying around in bed as usual, he overhears shouting outside the castle, so he uses his screens to monitor it. He sees tons of soldiers injured, so he heads outside to talk with his father. Upon talking, he learns that a large group of bandits ambushed them, showing no mercy. This makes him feel as if he has failed his kingdom, wishing he could have taken the fall instead of the foot soldiers. Once Hart hears this, he becomes enraged, and finally shows the demonic mana he once showed before. He walks around by the soldiers using his barrier magic to heal every one of them, solving the issue. With him even bringing back limbs, his father can only call it a miracle from God. He then heads to bed that night without a thought about it, but is woken up by Flay. She stands outside of his room asleep, making Hart realize she has been waiting outside this whole time after he commanded her to shut up. Because he feels bad, he decides to show her something special, taking her to the roof. Here he displays large screens around him, scanning to find the bandits. It takes a bit of time, but he eventually finds the group along with a spy from his own kingdom. With this in mind, he heads there immediately, flying through the sky alongside Flay. Charl happens to notice this, but she keeps quiet, knowing it would cause a ruckus if she spoke out. Meanwhile, within the bandits' headquarters, they talk about winning the battle. With one of the men being a captain in Gold's army, it is revealed he is the main spy. Hart then approaches them and uses his skills to force all of them into submission. Because they have no escape, they are forced to spill the beans on why they betrayed his father, Gold. They tell him that a neighboring kingdom is planning for war, so they thought it would be best to take him out internally. With them being paid a large sum, they tell Hart everything they know, thinking he will let them off after this. Hart, however, has other plans, ordering Flay to burn everything within the area, including the men. This causes a large panic amongst the bandits, ending their chances of ever fighting back against Hart's providence. Hart decides to keep this hush-hush, hoping his father will learn of his merits discreetly. As Gold hears about this, he tells his attendant to get to the bottom of whoever took them out. While he talks, Charl asks who could have done it, thinking he may have some idea. Little does he know the people who destroyed the bandits were Flay and his own son Hart. Charl realizes this, but she decides not to share this information, instead deciding to run off an investigation. She wonders who her brother truly is, seeing various skills of his. Because of this suspicion, she asks Flay if there are two Harts, telling her that she saw him leaving the castle yesterday. She thought it was suspicious, so she went and visited him in his room, but somehow he was still there. This makes Flay realize she knows his true identity, so she shares his true identity with her. She explains that Hart is actually the strongest person she has ever met, being born with immense power. Although she has shared all of this, she demands that Charl keep it quiet as to not expose him. Then later that night, she goes and tells Hart of what happened, making him wonder what to do next. He decides to set up barriers and alarms to alert him next time Charles tries something on him. To bait her in that night, he walks around the palace like he is asleep until she gets too close. He exposes her cover and asks what she is doing, but she runs away in a panic. Later that night, when he goes to take a bath, he finds that she is still just watching him, causing him to wonder what to do. This cycle repeats for a week straight, with Charles spying on him no matter what he may be doing. That is until on the 7th day his parents inform him they will be going on a vacation and leaving them to the castle. With this in mind, Hart offers to give them Flay for protection, but they refuse. This makes Hart realize if he ever had a chance to talk with Charles, then now is the time. Then suddenly, as he goes to sleep, his alarms go off, making him realize his mom and sister are in trouble. He tries to get there as soon as he can, but ends up not making it in time, instead deciding to guide them to safety. By using his barrier magic, he leads her to a cliff and urges her to jump. Without hesitation, his mom jumps and uses magic to break the fall. This allows them to hide in a nearby cave, keeping them safe in the meantime. Although this is a good spot to take cover, there are too many lights within the cave, forcing his mom to sacrifice herself. She tells Charles that she will run out and deal with them herself, promising to protect her. She then runs outside, but as she does, she recognizes illusion magic cast on the wall, giving her assurance that her daughter is safe. As she does this, however, her perpetrators emerge ready to fight. She realizes that if she surrenders here, she will be taken as a war prisoner, so she tries to end her own life. Right before she does, Hart emerges before her and knocks her out. He then takes out all of the enemies and brings her inside the cave once again. As he does this, he exerts his aura to Charles, causing her to recognize him. She calls out at him, and this makes Hart realize his cover is completely blown. He thinks she will hate him for hiding everything, but to his surprise, she asks him if he is a hero of justice. With no other options, he decides to follow this, telling her he hides his power in order to take down bad guys. This opens Charles up to Hart, expressing how much she cares for him. She tells him that she will hide everything from the others, promising to keep his cover as a hero hidden. Later that night, when Hart heads back to his home, he overhears everything that went down alongside his father. He acts like he has no clue what happened, when in reality, he was the one who took down all of the enemies. As they talk, Hart decides to reveal various details of how they even got the information about his mother's travels, hoping to help his father out from the shadow. Then suddenly the rest of his family comes bursting through the door. This time, however, Charles goes to talk with Hart, showing their relationship has changed completely. With Charles previously never talking with Hart, they are stunned to see her claiming to be in love with him. Although it's a bit weird at first, Hart decides to just go with it. Episode 3. Ever since that day, Charles has been barging into his room on a daily basis, making sure to remind him that she exists. He doesn't mind, however, him having no real family to talk with in his past life. She then notices one of his display screens, so she runs over to check it out. She compliments his skills, asking how he even does all of this. He says it's ancient magic, that being what he told his father to, which she informs him there are more ancient magic books in the library. With this in mind, he heads over to the library, where he just now learns of all the various books their family has. It doesn't take Charles long to collect a handful of books that contain various reviving magic. Hart wonders if his barrier magic relates to ancient magic at all, wanting to become stronger himself. As he talks with Charles, she asks him to read to her, to which he accepts. Once he does, she goes and sits on his lap, claiming whenever their parents read to her, she sits on their lap. While they read, Hart eventually gets bored, wishing he could watch anime like he used to. Charles expresses curiosity to him, wanting to know more about what this anime is. This causes Hart to open up his geeky side, talking about the various anime and how they are made. This makes her interested, so she asks him to let her watch it alongside him next time. Hart, however, also wishes he could make anime, so instead of doing his usual tasks, he diverts his attention. It takes 2 weeks, but eventually he is able to gain access to a site that allows one to watch anime. This makes Charles happy, so she begins watching it, picking the magical girls anime before all else. As she watches, she becomes stunned, wondering how pictures could move around. Although she is able to watch it, she has no clue what they are saying in the shows, her not knowing Japanese. Because of this, Hart decides to teach her Japanese, and after only 2 hours, she learns basic Japanese. Another 2 weeks pass, and now Charles has fully learned Japanese, allowing her to watch and enjoy anime to the fullest. Despite this seeming like a good thing, Charles ends up getting addicted to anime like he once was. He knows, however, that as his big brother, he must restrict her consumption of anime to ensure she doesn't become a NEET. He decides to limit her to 3 hours of TV a day, as if that is a reasonable amount. He tells her she will become a bum if she watches anime all day, so she needs to restrict herself more. Later that day at dinner, Charles becomes super tired, causing Gold to question what they are doing. She explains that they are just studying ancient magic, allowing them to fall for his ploy. Following this, he heads to the bath and finds Charles alongside him. He questions what she is doing at first, but with her only being 5 years old, there is technically nothing wrong with it. This may be the case, but in reality he is much older than he looks, making him feel a bit weird. Once they finish the bath, they head to bed, but for some reason Hart finds Charles next to him in bed. Along with this, his mom is watching over them, telling herself that her dream of them being good friends will soon come true. The next morning, Gold heads out once again, this time to hopefully defeat the thugs within his land for good. With him being gone, Hart decides to waste his day playing around on his TV. As he does, Charles asks him if he can just solve the issue so that they can all live in peace. She begs him to become the hero she knows him as, hoping he will help their father get home sooner. He agrees after her cuteness overload, and this causes her to ask him to show her his transformation. Hart then decides to transform into Zero from Code Geass, showing he can not only change his clothes within an instant, but also his height. Now with this new form, he heads out like a hero, telling her he will make quick work of the thugs. Although he sees it as a pain, he decides to go with it anyways, trapping all of the thugs within a barrier. Once they are trapped, he walks over to them and releases it, allowing them to reveal their dark side. He acts like a fool in front of them, thus angering them into charging him, but they soon get defeated. Upon defeating the thugs, his father emerges, asking what he is doing around here. Hart questions what to do, but eventually decides to play his character. He introduces himself as still pending, because he is still thinking of his name. This seems a bit strange, but Gold goes along with it, asking what his goal is. Hart tells them he is a hero of justice, flying away in the process. Once he gets home, Charles goes to comfort him, calling him super cool. Because of this, he continues his rampage around the area, defeating various thugs, until he begins getting called the Black Knight. A couple years after these events, Hart turns 10. During this time, he finally managed to make his clone imitate him better, even fooling the likes of Charles. While he talks with her, his mother interrupts them, asking for Hart to come along. He tries to get his clone to take his place, but it acts lazy, telling him it's too much of a bother. This forces him to head outside anyway, where he goes to meet with the visitors. Apparently the people visiting them are the children of the king, one of them, Laius, being the heir to the throne. He acts all high and mighty around them, calling their place a dump, not knowing that Hart is his older brother. While he talks, Hart glares at him, causing Laius to get angry and confront him. He demands a duel against Hart, calling him a level 2, nobody who was adopted from an orphanage. Little does he know Hart is not only his older brother, but also a level 1002. He then inspects Laius's level and learns he is level 9 out 40, with 40 being his highest. For comparison, his father is level 32 with a max cap of 32, and the strongest level in this world is level 78. As the battle goes on, Hart plays the dummy, allowing Laius to smack him around. He then gets overconfident and tells Hart to fight back, so he does this. Within an instant, he teleports behind him and smacks him to the ground. After this happens, the daughter of the king asks if he is really a level 2, seeing him clearly be stronger than Laius, who is level 9. As they talk, Laius gets ticked off, so he sends in a magical attack, Fireball, but when faced off against Hart's barrier, it gets absorbed. He then resummons the fireballs he threw at him, asking if he wants him to throw them back. This causes his spirit to be defeated, so he falls to the ground, admitting his defeat. Later that night, Hart goes to sleep that night, wondering if he did too much by making a joke out of Laius. Episode 4. After this all happens, he spends his days relaxing as usual until one specific day. With Charles spending lots of her time monitoring the area, she always makes sure to send out Hart to fight. This makes him tired of always running around, so he wonders if there is an alternative. As he thinks of this, Flay enters the room, giving him the idea to send her out. Before she sends her out, he orders her not to show too much to Charles, knowing she is one of the strongest monsters. They then set out for the area, and this time Hart decides to join along as well. Accompanying him this time is Flay, claiming she is the Red Knight. Within an instant, she uses her flame magic to roast the thugs, forcing Hart to protect them. He throws a barrier around them, and Flay confuses it for their own magic, so she uses more of her powers. This only forces him to stop her again, eventually being forced to take over the battle completely. Once they get back, Charles thinks that they were trying to make her laugh, calling them a comedy duo. This only makes his life more hectic, Hart wondering if he will ever get to live a lazy life like he wanted. Meanwhile, Laius is seen throwing his fist into a bed, wondering how he could lose to the level 2 trash. As he punches his bed, his attendant enters, telling him he needs to get ready for the day. He also learns that Charles will be accompanying him for some kind of party. While this happens, Hart lies around in bed as usual, getting presented with food from Charles. He ended up skipping his dinner tonight thanks to his clone, but it seems to be getting more and more human. It jumps into bed and lies around like how Hart does most days. This leaves Charles to inform Hart of her dinner date with the prince, so he decides to stalk them before it happens. He searches around the forest they will be traveling in and finds some suspicious-looking people standing around a summoning circle. He decides to interrupt it, asking the suspicious people what they are doing. They immediately assume he is an enemy, so they start firing their magic at Hart, but as you can expect, nothing happens. This forces the main guy to use the summoning circle early, bring out various skeleton knights. With Hart having plot armor, however, he is easily able to destroy them even when they surround him. As the battle goes on, he realizes they have a core allowing them to move, so he decides to take control of the skeletons. Upon seeing this, the mage uses all of the remaining power in the circle to summon a large golem. It easily destroys all of the skeletons and knocks back Hart, destroying his barrier in the process. This makes Hart realize he needs to step up his game, so he decides to think of a plan. Much like the previous monsters, they have a jewel embedded in their chest, allowing him to realize how to defeat it. He easily destroys the core then. Like the previous monsters, he takes control of it himself. With this being done, he ties up the thugs and decides to bury them all alive to ensure they don't cause any more problems. He decides to spare one of the thugs to question their motives. Upon doing so, he learns they were hired by the queen to assassinate Charles in order to prevent her from becoming the queen. Apparently, all of these attacks on him and his family have been the current queen's doing, including the previous assassination attempts. This angers him, so he plays around with the leader of the thugs, showing he doesn't show mercy when in battle. He wonders what he should do with the current queen, knowing she is his mother but also knowing she is evil. To start, he decides to join Charles for their ride to the capital, hoping to protect Charles on the way. While they travel towards the kingdom, Laius asks Hart the same thing that his father suspected, wondering if he is a demi-human, with a demi-human possessing abnormal strength that isn't capable of being recorded by the magic scaling. They wonder if he could be one. The only thing that makes them think otherwise is the fact he has no special body parts like horns to show him as a demi-human. Then, as their travels go by, the sun sets, forcing them to set up camp for the night. They end up stopping within a rural village, filled with various crops. During this time, Hart decides to talk more with his father about the current situation. He asks him how he would react if the current queen was after Charles' life. He tells Hart that he suspected this but could never think it would be true. Gold informs him that even if the queen came after his daughter, he would fight for Charles. He also shares that currently the king has lost his power because of the queen's antics. With her previously being a hero of the kingdom who slayed the demon king, she married into the throne. Once she became the queen, she ended up becoming evil, where she has since tried to take over the kingdom. With all of this in mind, he asks Hart to continue protecting Charles, even if he isn't around. He promises to keep her safe, and moves on to figuring out how to deal with the queen. Flay offers to take her down herself, but Hart knows he needs to deal with this himself before the worst happens. Episode 5. While he plans his attack, the queen is seen talking with her guards about the Black Knight. They talk about how much the Black Knight has been in their way, messing with their plans to assassinate Charles. This angers her, claiming that she is just a child, telling them it shouldn't be so hard to kill a single child. She thinks to herself, maybe I should just deal with them herself, but she knows it might cause conflicts. As she says this to herself, the Black Knight appears before her, claiming to have come to confront her directly. He tells her that the people she sent were too easy, informing her they are all dead. With this being said, she decides to show him her power, using a triple cast magical spell to encase Hart in water. She tells him to hurry up and drown, but this simple attack doesn't work against Hart. He breaks free and continues to stop every incoming attack by using his barrier skills. After a barrage of attacks, she thinks that he is done for, but he shows no signs of backing down. This makes her question who this man could possibly be, but before she can think, he reflects all of her attacks. He continues bombarding her with magic until her barrier eventually breaks, making her realize he is even stronger than the Demon King. Right before her mana runs out, she pulls out her sword and dashes towards him, hoping to land a blow. Thanks to Hart's training with his father, however, he is able to match her in the sword, reflecting all attacks. She eventually overpowers him onto the ground and claims to be the world's strongest, someone nobody can stop. Right after she says this, he cuts down her incoming attack and puts her on the ground. He then places a slave collar on her, informing her if she tries to take it off or continue to kill Charles, she will die. He reminds her that with this collar on her, she is powerless before him. This drives her into madness. wondering if she will live the rest of her life as his slave. Following this, he heads back to meet with Flay, who is impressed with his actions. He tells her that he will never let those who hurt his family slide, not even his own mother. Since these events, 5 years pass, and Hart has grown up to become an even more unrivaled force. On top of this, Charl hasn't experienced any attacks at her life, showing his collar is working. Because he has allowed Charl to watch anime the past few years as well, she has become a total anime geek. While they play in the sand, Hart notices Flay shivering from the bone, showing she is powerless against the cold. He then uses his magic to create some clothes for her, revealing his magic has powered up a ton since we last saw him. As they play, Charl asks him for some help with a secret task, whispering it into his ear. With sparkling eyes, she expects him to help her, and although he is reluctant at first, he obliges. He then makes a stance and calls out an attack name, causing a large attack to destroy a hole in the earth. This impresses Charl, so she jumps with joy all over him, showing gratitude. Right after he uses this attack, his parents emerge, wondering what happened here. With no other option, Hart decides to make a replica of the Black Knight, explaining he was the one who did it. He says that the Black Knight suddenly appeared and decided to show them a special move. They, for some reason, accept this as being normal, and they go on about their day. As they stand around, Hart asks his father about the Queen. Gold explains that there are rumors she has a slave collar on and has been restricted from using her magic. Although the reason behind it is unknown, he says it's been a big help for them. With this out of the way, Hart tries to go back and hole up in his room, but his father stops him, telling him he needs to talk. He explains that with him being 14 years old now, he needs to attend the academy next year to hone his skills. This makes Hart realize his efforts of living as a shut-in have been in vain, so he decides to find another solution. With him telling his father he wants to be lazy, not working, he wonders what to do. His father then presents a letter of recommendation directly from the king, claiming that he is ordered to attend. Hart asks what the deal is, so his father informs him that Princess Marianne is behind this all, her personally requesting him to attend the school. With this in mind, Hart wonders what to do, knowing if he attends school he won't be able to live peacefully. Not only is he forced to attend with the princess, but apparently Lias is also attending the school. Gold tells him that although the queen has been quiet the past few years, he suspects she is behind this all. Even with this being said, Gold thinks that it would be a nice breath of fresh air if Hart left his estate for once. He tells his son that it's about time he started getting a girlfriend or two, so Hart accepts his request, thinking he can send his clone in his stead. With this in mind, he thinks of someone he can send along with his clone to make sure they keep their head on straight. As he talks with his father about potential candidates, his mother enters the room, asking for her to become the attendant. After this ends, he heads back to his room and asks his clone to attend school for him. At first, he accepts his request, telling him he will do it for him, but right after he laughs and informs him it was a joke. Because of this, Hart thinks of what he can bribe the clone with to force him into going. He says he will give him anime and games in the school, but this still doesn't work, him already having this at home. Hart then suggests they take turns going to school, switching back and forth. This still doesn't work though, so Hart tells him he guesses he will have to make another clone and replace him. Once he tells him that the fake Hart realizes he won't be able to get out of this unless he makes a ruckus, he starts screaming like a child, so Hart promises not only to give him all of his usual accommodations, but also a barrier to protect him from anything that comes his way. This ends up convincing him, knowing there is no escape, so Hart decides to head to his lake house getaway. He sits around in this cabin all day playing his iPad until his sister comes to visit one day. She asks to watch anime as usual, so he decides to allow her to stay for a bit. After a little while, he decides to check in on the clone, having left him at the house to prepare for school. Episode 6. As time goes by, Hart is left with only 3 more months to find an attendant that he can not only trust to watch over his clone, but also make sure he stays protected. In the meantime, while he looks, he decides to wander around aimlessly. Eventually, he arrives at a skeleton village who treat him as their master. See, this group of skeletons is the same group that the summoners summoned 5 years ago during their assassination attempt. He named the leader of the skeletons Johnny, trusting him with running the village. As he talks with Johnny, he notices more monsters within the town, making him wonder what's going on. Johnny explains that over time, more monsters have found the village and decided to make it their home as well. To continue the tour, Johnny shows him a large field where he has began growing crops for the village. He takes him into the field and shows various crops, including ones he has never seen before. With so many crops, Hart wonders if he could take some of these, but knows the monsters need them for their own growth. Eventually, after Johnny finishes the tour, Hart begins to realize how nice Johnny really is. He considers him for an attendant, but knows he would need to first change his appearance. Although this seems like a good idea, he soon realizes that Johnny is much too important to take away from this village. Not only this, but Johnny is a big yapper, talking all day about various things. This makes Hart realize although he is loyal and a valuable comrade, he is far too loud for his tastes. Because of how much he talks, he needs to take a break, heading to a nearby lake to rest. As he tries to enjoy some peace and quiet, the golem he once defeated emerges, standing beside him. Unlike the others, he doesn't talk all day because he has no mouth. This proves for a peaceful moment between the two, allowing Hart to fully recognize how nice his golem is. The golem then presents him with a flower while blushing, asking if he likes it. Hart reveals that the golem is a female who he knows has a crush on him. Because of this, he asks the golem if she likes the village, thinking she is bored of being so big. She tells him, however, that she likes her peaceful life within the village, not wanting to leave. This leaves Hart with still no attendant, making him wonder if he will ever find someone suitable. Then when he arrives home, he finds Flay asking him why he needs a new attendant. With him spending all day looking but having no luck, he tells her to buzz off and give him some alone time. He then goes to play games, but is yet again interrupted this time by Charl. She asks what he was doing, so he guides her into the monster village, showing her around. While all of this happens, a large blue dragon is seen fighting some adventurers within the snow. They try to take her down, but because of how thick the snow is, the dragon ends up narrowly making an escape. Hart later learns of this from his father, telling him that it could now be in their area. He urges him to stay alert, knowing if this dragon wanted, it could cause tons of calamities. He then asks Flay to go and investigate the lands to make sure their land is safe. Flay refuses, however, claiming that although she is strong, she is a bad match up against a blue dragon, using fire magic. With this in mind, Hart decides to think of a solution himself, asking his father for more time. He eventually decides to deal with it himself, so he wanders around their land until he finds the dragon lying on the ground. On top of this, a large group of adventurers are seen heading towards her, causing him to act fast. He runs over to the dragon and makes it just in time to prevent the attacks from the adventurers. He intends to just stop their attacks, but Flay ends up burning them all to a crisp. After this happens, the dragon wakes up and instantly freezes Hart, showing they are not one to reason with. Thankfully, it's dealing with Flay, so he breaks out of it instantly, but not without complaining. He tells the dragon to stand down, explaining he is a friend, not foe, living in peace. Once the dragon hears this, she apologizes to Hart and informs him that she was just living in peace until the adventurers came to attack her. She spent the last 300 years sitting around in a cave until one day when an adventurer entered her cave. He ended up dropping a book on his way out, causing the dragon to read it to completion multiple times. She loved reading this book, so when she finished it, she went to a library in the closest town to find more. By taking on a human form, she was able to sneak in and out, gaining tons of knowledge in the process. Sadly, however, this bookworm dragon ended up getting attacked, and all of her books burned by the adventurers. This leads us to the present, where she has been on the run from the adventurers, wishing she could just have a peaceful life. Upon hearing this, Flay is moved, so she offers the dragon to come stay with them in their lake house estate. This offer entices the dragon, so she introduces herself as the Blizzard Dragon, recognizing Hart as her new master. She then transforms into her human form, holding a childlike appearance. After doing this, he introduces himself to her and renames her Liza to solidify the contract together. With this new companion, Flay gets jealous but is forced to accept it, holding on to her attachment to Hart as his first servant.